What are the three key fantasy football questions we want answered about the 2022 New England Patriots as they head into training camp or the preseason? It's time to break it down right here and right now as we get another edition of Locked On Fantasy Football.
Are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. As usual, I'm your host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL and fantasy football for sportingnews.com. A little bit more of that quiet time before training camps open all across the league, and we'll go into accelerated advanced scouting mode for fantasy football here. We'll see all these teams come together. What teams do you want to invest a little bit more in with their personnel for fantasy football? We're breaking that down here for you. We took care of the entire NFC. We broke out all 16 teams and looked at their key questions. Now we're halfway through our first division in the AFC East. We talked about the Bills and the Dolphins. Today's team is the Patriots, so we'll try to answer three key questions that we have and want to know the answers for before we finally make our picks there in late August for our teams in fantasy football. So we will get to them here in a moment, and we will have the Jets on deck here to finish off this division on our next show. Before we do that, thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. We are free and available to you on all platforms. So here we are with the New England Patriots. We're going to ask a simple question here for our first one, and we usually start with quarterback. It's a good place to start, set the table for the rest of the offense, like it does in reality. Mac Jones, fantasy sleeper? Question mark? Right now, Mac Jones is ranked right at the bottom of the QB2s in that 23-24 range here. Now, Mac Jones is trying to live the parallel life of Tom Brady and get in the playoffs first as a young quarterback, lean on the defense, lean on certain personnel and schematic looks to help him succeed, cut down on the interceptions. But we know it took a while for Tom Brady to make that transition from caretaker to playmaker. And I think that's not going to be much different here for Mac Jones. Part of the problem here is that Mac Jones hasn't seen a significant improvement in this wide receiver core since Tom Brady left. So Brady went out and wanted to find a team that had established weapons. Well, he went to one with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, and they added Rob Gronkowski and Antonio Brown. And then all of a sudden, the Buccaneers look like this team of world beaters with the receiving core, while the Patriots continue to look a little bit pedestrian. It's not for lack of trying. They keep trying to add guys, but reluctant to invest very highly at the position. They have a first rounder that's buried on the depth chart here, so that's a concern. Then you're looking at the tight ends. Hunter Henry's a good source of production. He's a very prolific red zone receiver, and we know that, and he's had a good connection with Jones here early, but where does his production come from? I'm not sure. I just don't think there are going to be a lot of games where Jones lights it up. The weapons just don't call for that. The Patriots don't want to play that type of game anyway. They want to grind some games away. They need to win battles of attrition. So kind of circling back to the early Bill Belichick successful days where a lot of it is based on the defense, ball control, trying to win that way, going a little bit of a zig direction while everyone zags with these explosive passing games. Now, that's not to say Mac Jones will not get there in terms of being able to put those prolific numbers up in this league. They could come at any point. I just don't see them happening right now in year two. He had a very successful year one in terms of the leadership, the intangibles, the qualities there that were needed. And we've heard a lot about how he's bulked up. He doesn't have that dad bod as an older quarterback now. He's kind of in shape here, worked to get to where he needed to be with his fitness. So, and that was the one knock on Mac Jones. Could he have some kind of athleticism? He actually wasn't kind of a dud as a runner there at Alabama. He had some moments. He could move it a little bit. He wasn't, however, as mobile as Jalen Hurts or Tua Tagovailoa, those type of quarterbacks. So Mac Jones can be a little bit more than a pocket passer. I think he doesn't get enough credit for being able to move, and that's what he wants to do. Remember, Tom Brady, not anything close to a fleet of foot, but he could use his footwork well, move around in the pocket, make good decisions there, kept himself in incredible shape. So were the calling cards of Tom Brady, even though if he wasn't the fastest or strongest, he was always sharpest with his body and mind. So that's what Mac Jones is trying to get to. That's why they drafted him. They saw a lot of Brady in him. Right now, his backups are Brian Hoyer. He's back in the mix. And Bailey Zappi, they're from Western Kentucky. I thought he might have a shot at another team, maybe like the Eagles, and be a contingency plan there. But now he's going to be a straight up backup to Jones in development here, moving on from Jared Stidham, this organization did. So they always like to develop a quarterback, and Zappi is the guy. So nothing to see there behind Jones. There's no question mark, him or Cam Newton. Those questions are buried in his rookie season. Mac Jones is the established starter, and as a starting quarterback, you'll eventually get there with some fantasy football numbers. You just can't be around this league for a long time without kind of stepping up your game and seeing the next step as a passer. I just don't think it's going to come here. Eventually, this league is going to call on these quarterbacks to put up these big numbers. You can't hide your quarterback. You can't play around the quarterback. Things have changed a lot in the couple decades that Bill Belichick took over the Patriots. And part of it is Tom Brady and Josh McDaniels, that offense. And McDaniels is gone here. So you figure there's going to be a little less creativity and a little less just overall explosiveness and effectiveness here from this offense. So Mac Jones actually might need to take a few lumps statistically to go forward. So, yeah, I think fantasy sleeper is a stretch. I'm not even sure I'm interested in him that much as a QB2. Just want to see a lot more from the Patriots second-year quarterback before we want to even put him on the fantasy football radar for this year or beyond. All right, we will break down the other big Patriots question in their backfield tied to their running backs in our next segment here on Locked On Fantasy Football. We're looking at the three key questions facing these Patriots. Before we do that, I've got to tell you that this episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by Dave. Level with me. We've all been in a situation at some point in our lives when we're a little tight on cash. Maybe you could only afford to put in a few gallons of gas in your tank, or you got another save the date and you're wondering how you're going to afford a gift. That's where Dave can help. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful, especially when unexpected expenses come up. Now, Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Hindsight is 2020, and you can't change the past, but what if you get a little help from your future self? Maybe you'd like to borrow a little cash. Now you can with Dave. Dave is the banking app that will help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, or just catch up on your bills. You can finally tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. There's no interest and no credit check required. Millions of people have already downloaded the Dave app to get the financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and need some extra help, download Dave and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's Dave, D-A-V-E, just like the name. Sign up for an extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Future you will thank you. All right, it is time to continue the show here and a look at our Patriots key questions for fantasy football in 2022. We talked about Mac Jones and we explored his fantasy sleeper potential. It's not there yet in 2022. Let's answer the tough question of the backfield. Can you trust Damien Harris as an RB2 with all the competition now in the Patriots backfield? In a quick answer, no. Looking at Ramondre Stevenson, he's a special back. He was already cutting into Harris's work. He's good change of pace, explosive there. You also have James White hanging on as a key receiving back. And this is the back that worries me the most. It's the rookie Pierre Strong. He's lingering at number 4. And McDaniels, we know in his era before he left to be the head coach of the Raiders for his second gig here, He liked to spread the ball around. He wasn't committed to one back. He's very situational. Leaned on Harris quite a bit, but they've cycled in some other guys out there. They really liked what Stevenson can do. So we don't know exactly who the Patriots offensive coordinator is, but Joe Judge, Matt Patricia, they will go to something similar that they've had work. So I think it just really reeks of committee here, and we don't want to attach ourselves. They got to find a role for James White. I think James White is a tough person for the Patriots to quit. They keep bringing him back, even with his favorite quarterback, Tom Brady, long gone here. Strong has a lot of swing qualities here. Stevenson can be a power back, but also change of pace with explosiveness. So it is a lot of different guys who can do a lot of different things, and that's usually not good for a backfield. And it's not anything that you can define or see a specialist here. So it's going to be tough. In general, talk about it all the time. I want to avoid the Patriots backfield. It just is a mess. You can't trust anyone to stay healthy. That also seems to become an issue here as well. They're going to plug in anyone they want beyond that offensive line. They can go by committee. They can go by hot hand. They can go situationally. They cannot go situationally. There are so many variables here that the Patriots use here. I call it the Jonas Gray conundrum, that anyone can be plugged in here at any time with the Patriots and take over as a key back. And when there's other talented backs, that makes it even more difficult. Remember when Damien Lewis was around, cutting into some of these guys' production. So there's always someone there. I should say Dion Lewis. Someone is there. So looking at the Patriots, yeah, they could probably plug in Damian Lewis, and he would probably win an Emmy in this backfield somehow. And that's how crowded and how versatile and how you can put anyone in this backfield and they'll produce. And that is kind of the problem, that Patriots have such a good system. They trust guys to do their job in the system that it's impossible to trust one specific guy. So really worried about Damien Harris. Right now, his ranking is outside the top 24. So already you're starting with an RB3 for the top Patriots running back. So that's a bit of concern. Now, what do you get Pierre Strong? I think you get a little bit of everything. That's the guy I'm going to watch most here. Stevenson, yeah, they've liked for a while. White, we know that his role is capped at being the receiving back. But Strong, they just don't go out and draft backs unless they have a bit of a plan for them. Now, they are kind of replenishing this depth. They've had Brandon Bolden, Rex Burkhead, and some of those guys that are now departed here. So think to add additional depth. But Pierre Strong can do a little bit of everything well. And Stevenson kind of can cut into Harris. He can cut into White. So those are two guys you worry about, the young backs. And will they just go full-blown situational here? That's what you're worried about, the Patriots. And Damien Harris has had enough injury issues as well. They've also cycled in Sonny Michel in this system. So they're just not committed to one guy. They don't care about their draft status or anything. Harris is the guy that they liked the most out of these guys in the draft, but pushed him with Stevenson, now pushing him again with Pierre Strong. So really, Patriots backfield situation, it's not the greatest fantasy football team in general. Now, if I'm going to invest in anybody in this Patriots backfield, I'm going to go for the cheapest guy, and that's Pierre Strong as a late round flyer. That's basically where I'm going to go. I don't want to use valuable capital there for RB3 or flex on Harris and Stevenson when they could cut into each other, and I'm going to get limited return from those guys, where I'm going to swing for the fences a little bit. And if something happens to Harris or Stevenson and they get limited here and Strong has a good training camp, he could be a very good value here. So we're going to watch this carefully. He's kind of the guy that you're going to throw out late in drafts, so we're not sure who to take. If we're still waiting to take our kicker, if we're still using kickers in our league, just someone late that you could throw out, Pierre Strong, the rookie, would not surprise me at all if he ends up in a big role here. So invest cheaply in the Patriots backfield is the general rule of thumb. Don't jump on Harris or Stevenson early. Get them at good values beyond their draft ranking and ADP. Then that's okay. But really trying to say, oh, I got an RB2 out of this situation, you're outsmarting yourself there. Just don't force it here. Go in a different direction if you can. Get those values before you dip into these questionable committees where it could go in any direction during the season. All right, that breaks down now the Patriots quarterback situation. Running backs, we do have to approach wide receivers here, and we got to find out if someone besides Hunter Henry, tight end, is going to step up here in this new look, yet again, wide receiver core for the Patriots. So we'll explore that in our final segment here. I got to tell you, it's exciting here to Check out all the great off-season content on Locked On NFL Network here. Which NFL stars move the betting line the most? Starting July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at our sponsor, BetOnline. It's available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts, just like the show, Locked On Fantasy Football. It is a time to close the show here, looking at the final key Patriots fantasy football questions. We really have a lot. The question is, are the Patriots going to give us anything here? We know Mac Jones, we're cool on him. His Alabama fellow brethren here, Damien Harris, cool on him. Now let's look at this Patriots wide receiver depth chart, shall we? Devontae Parker, in a rare intra-division trade with the Dolphins. The Dolphins dumped him off here to the Patriots. They moved on, of course, with Tyreek Hill. We talked about him in depth and his role. So Devontae Parker leaves Miami, goes to a division rival in New England. Then you have a Jacoby Myers there in the slot as your top option. You have Kendrick Bourne as your third receiver. So inside is Myers. He typically lines in the slot. So Bourne had some moments last year. He had kind of some sneaky backdoor wide receiver 3 value for some of last season. Nelson Aguilar had some flashes last season, but now he's buried at number 4 with the addition of Devontae Parker. They have an exciting rookie. They thought they would really address wide receiver a little bit higher. No, they end up with Tyquan Thompson, an absolute speedster. He's ahead of their first-round draft pick that is hanging on by a thread of the depth chart, N'Keal Harry. So he's number 6. Then you have Ty Montgomery, a cast-off from the Saints, and another cast-off from the Saints, little Jordan Humphrey. So, yeah, that's your Patriots wide receiver core. So now you bury Aguilar even more. Bourne's role could be more limited now as the second outside receiver. Devontae Parker just can't stay healthy. We know that, carrying over from the Dolphins. Look, the tight ends might be a big part of what they do. The key there is going to be Jonnu Smith being healthy. Hunter Henry is going to be a big part already, but I would see Jonnu Smith having a bigger role as well. I think they moved on from Devin Aziazi and Dalton Keene. Those were their young 2 tight ends they were looking for in 12 personnel, but they could really resort to a lot of that to help their running game and to settle in Jones a little bit better with Henry and Smith. So looking at that combination, they got to lean on that more. I mean, Parker, they're going to try to resurrect, get some good years out of. The kind of flashed with the Dolphins for a while, had the good chemistry with Ryan Fitzpatrick, but really kind of faded with the injuries and trying to connect with Tua Tagovailoa. So hopefully this will rekindle some of his talent here. And he's a first-round pick out of Louisville, so he's got that pedigree here that is going to translate well into what the Patriots want to do. For now, you have to say he's their best fantasy football asset, but what does that mean exactly? You're looking at best, I think a wide receiver 4. Myers is ranked as a wide receiver 5, born around that same level, and then Aguilar drops into wide receiver 6, 7 territory. So, yeah, so not a lot of starting confidence here with Devontae Parker. So I think Parker is the guy I would still take a shot on because he's got a big body, can maybe help them in the red zone. He's a little bit more established. Right now, he is number 1 on the depth chart, so he left Bourne and Aguilar for that key spot outside working with Myers. But Myers did finally score a touchdown last year, so he might be one of those core players, and Jones has some establishment with him in terms of throwing the ball all over the field. But Parker just is more of that classic and number 1 type body, and they needed that person. So they took a flyer. They didn't invest a lot in this position, but you'd have to say follow where they're going to go and why they picked up Parker. They weren't happy with the Myers-Bourne-Aguilar combination. Very limited ceiling there, so Parker gives them a little bit of upside there. So he's not a bad fantasy football sleeper. I'm not going to go and suddenly take him and try to show him off that I know that he's the number 1 for the Patriots. Try to take him as a wide receiver 3. Get good value for these guys. Again, don't invest too highly in any Patriots in fantasy football in 2022. Basically the theme of this year. There's too many other guys at this position. Wide receivers very deep this year across the league for fantasy football. I don't think you got to force it, but if I'm going to go with one, I'm going to just go with Parker. And Parker's addition really, again, fades me on all 3 of those guys, Myers, Bourne, and Aguilar. Just not interested too much, especially if they use that 12 personnel. Remember the rule of 3 here with the targets. It could be really Parker and the two veterans at tight end, Henry and Smith, being the key targets for Jones. And it comes full circle on why it was hard to invest in Jones and believe in Jones as a QB2 with upside here in 2020. I think he's just a guy right now in fantasy football. And that's how you have to consider this whole Patriots passing game. It's limited in Hunter Henry being the best asset by far because of his scoring prowess. Jonah may be having a little bit of sleeper potential here, but who do you trust in the Patriots running back core, in their wide receiver core? Really no one, but you're going to lean to get the best value without overreaching and overdrafting Harris or Parker here as the number ones on the depth chart as we go into training camp. So there you have it. The New England Patriots, really a team that you look at in backfield has some pretty good value. The passing game, very limited value. If you can find the right guy in the backfield, it works. However, so that's the catch with them. And really, their defense might be their most reliable asset here in fantasy football. So something to keep in mind. The Patriots, without Josh McDaniels, I think it could be a bit of a struggle, and you can expect a drop-off overall in their production. Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen today. Now make your second listen of the Locked On NFL podcast. Keep in mind that top 50 list is coming up there from BetOnline. Our national NFL experts and insiders keep fans dialed over the biggest stories and latest news from around the league, because an offseason doesn't get an equal break in the action. And do we know that here in Locked On Fantasy Football as we continue our look at all 32 teams? We're now down to one more team in the AFC East. We'll get that team in our next show. That would be the New York Jets. So excited to talk about them next, and then we'll dive into the teams in alphabetical order that are in the AFC North. So if you missed any of those shows on those teams, the key questions, they're up there on our archives there, and we are hopeful that we'll find real answers and better answers other than our look right now at where things stand here as we get to more developments happen in training camp and preseason. So looking forward to that here on Locked On Fantasy Football. Thanks for listening to Locked On Fantasy Football. This is Vinnie Iyer. Have a great day, and on deck, we will talk about the 2022 New York Jets.